Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
business editor and columnist Greg Jefferson,
investigative reporter Brian Chasnoff.
We're recording this on April 19th. It's first day of early voting for the May 1st municipal elections. Would recommend to anybody who is following the local elections to read a story by our colleague Josh Fechter on Mayor Ron Nirenberg. A lot of insight into his leadership style and his tenure as mayor. And also, I learned that his favorite band is The Doors. And so that was also helpful to me. But
yeah, that was surprising to me.
Me too.
I don't know if does he still idolize Jim Morrison, do you think?
Yeah, that's not an idol I would necessarily expect him to pick. You know, I know he's a classic rock guy, but I didn't think he would necessarily Anyway, so we'll leave you with that. But I recommend the story. It's very good. One development in the mayoral race in the past week is Ryan Garcia, who's campaign director for Mayor Nirenberg and who kind of led the charge on the proposition vote last year to get workforce development passed. The Nirenberg campaign has parted ways with him. The circumstances are kind of murky. It's a little unusual to have that happen just a week before early voting starts. But, based on the polls, and I think the general feeling out there is that Mayor Nirenberg is in pretty solid shape in his race against Greg Brockhouse. But we'll see about that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about something that happened last week. It was really unusual, and I was actually reaching out to people that I knew who've followed San Antonio politics for longer than I have to see if they could think of any precedent for this, because I couldn't. We had a sitting council member, Roberto Trevino, endorsing the challenger to one of his fellow council members. He endorsed Jalen McKee Rodriguez in District 2, the East Side District, over the incumbent Jada Andrews Sullivan. And Greg, I want to ask you first, because you've covered San Antonio politics for a long time, whether you can think of a parallel instance, and also because you've served as a council staffer. What does it do to the dynamic between council offices or council members when you have one person basically say I'm supporting the person who's trying to get you out of office?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I can't recall any instance apart from this in which one sitting council member endorses the opponent of another sitting council member. Yeah. And the reason for that is, city council is really a small world, and council members are, even in the physical layout of their office, they're often, they come across each other every day. They see each other face to face. And, human nature says you don't want to tick off somebody you see and work with every day. And that's definitely true at City Hall. I mean, is that good for the city? You've got council members who are maybe critical of one another, and there's plenty of criticism between council members. It just never breaks out into the open. Like normally city council members will share that with their staffs. It might bleed out a little beyond that, but I mean, there's, you rarely see one council member confronting another about how they're doing in the job. And that's what's happened in this case. But also, they've got like Trevino, he's got to work. He's got to work hand in hand on some issues with Andrew Sullivan, and that's going to be a lot harder now. I mean, she's going to be. I'm certain. She's a tiny bit upset about this, and that makes it difficult to collaborate with somebody. And when he comes around, the way council members get things done, one of the ways is if they want an ordinance, if they're fighting for an ordinance, they'll do what's called a CCR, a council
consideration request, right?
It's a little, yeah. Anyway, so it's basically a memo outlining what they want to accomplish in an ordinance, and they have to get the signatures of 5 of their colleagues. So they're constantly circulating these memos, and they're working other council members to get their support. And in that kind of setting, you don't want to you want to upset as few people as you can on council, because you're going to need their support for something. And this looks like, what Trevino's done is kind of, he's burned a bridge here. Absolutely. On city council. But he clearly feels strongly about it. He clearly thinks that, Jalen McGee Rodriguez would be a better council member. And my guess is he also thinks he has a good shot at winning. Also,
that's what I was going to say.
I feel like Trevino feels liberated from following the pack these days. I mean, look at his support for Proposition B as an example, right? I mean,
that's right. You're right.
It just seems. I mean, one spin on this could be political courage. I don't know if that's necessarily the correct interpretation, but maybe he's actually, stating and being transparent about how he really feels and believes without too much caution for the political consequences.
Yeah, another way of looking at that is, there's that possibility. There's also, he could be positioning himself for another office, whether it's eventually a mayor's race or some other office. Yeah. And he's really trying to carve out a profile in doing this. One thing you do have to keep in mind is, apart from the fact that council members have to work with one another, there's also a really strong feeling at city council that, you just don't interfere in the politics of another council district. That is not your neighborhood. That is not your area of expertise.
Yeah, that's why you see with zoning cases, council members tend to stay out of that. One of the things that I always think about is in 2013, I think it was, you had a similar dynamic in District 5 as you have in District 2 now. You had an incumbent, in that case, David Medina, who had a really strong challenger, Shirley Gonzalez. And there was some sleaze around David Medina and his time on council. But even so, then Mayor Julian Castro endorsed Medina. And I think it was basically because Medina asked for the endorsement and he said, okay, because that was, as you said, Greg, that's just the protocol. Like if you were a mayor and one of your council colleagues said, I'd like your endorsement, it's just, you probably tend to do it in those situations. But I think a couple of things here. I think Trevino, like you said, Greg, probably perceives that Jalen McHugh Rodriguez has a good chance of pulling off a win, and that might be the council member he ends up dealing with, and he's going to have a built-in good relationship with him. Also, Mohammed Rasul, who's Trevino's campaign manager, is also working on Jalen McHugh Rodriguez's campaign. So there was kind of that link between them to begin with. So yeah, that District 2 race. I think that Jada Andrews Sullivan is probably the most vulnerable incumbent this year among council members. So that's a race I think we're going to be watching really closely.
Is there what's your read on why that is?
I think that, she came in, there were a lot of questions about her. She had all these people who she owed, money to, who had worked in her campaign. So that was, she kind of got off to a stumbling start. And I don't think she's really carved out a place for herself. And in fairness, half of her time on council has been during the pandemic. And so I think interacting with constituents and everything has been affected by that. But and then you have the fact that she's getting challenged by somebody in Jalen McHugh Rodriguez, who actually served on her staff and can tell us about, things that he observed that he thought were really problematic. And so I think it's a combination. She might have not been as vulnerable if she hadn't, in this case, had this sort of young, energetic, progressive opponent who has been able to kind of, he's been able to raise some money and been able to generate some interest there. And that doesn't always happen. But in this case, that happened for.
But there were no acute incidents or votes that you recall that rubbed her constituents the wrong way.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that he has talked about I think there was the discussion about having a facility on the east side for housing migrants that there was some controversy about that, and Jalen McCurdy has talked about how, he felt that she was on the wrong side of that issue, and the council, her aides had to talk to her about that. But I think it's more just sort of the feeling that I've heard from people in the district that, they don't feel like she's really kind of connected with them. And so much of it comes down to constituent services. And I think that's something that I've heard people talking about. I wanted to talk about a new poll that we're seeing in the gubernatorial race, which involves Matthew McConaughey, aka David Wooderson, who we had a poll from Dallas Morning News and University of Texas Tyler showing McConaughey in a hypothetical race with Governor Greg Abbott at 45%, with Abbott at 33%. Now, McConaughey has been kind of teasing out a possible gubernatorial run for the past few months. He said that it's something that he's seriously considering. It could be that this is part of his promotion for a book, which came out a few months ago, and this is kind of a prolonged promotional campaign. But, Brian, I want to ask you, I guess, first, how seriously you take the poll, like how formidable you think he would be against Greg Abbott, and two, is it good for the state to have McConaughey or someone like McConaughey running? Two very different questions.
Well, I mean, you've had celebrity governors before, right? I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger in California is a correlation there that comes to mind. I know Arnold ended up being a pretty controversial governor. Right. So right. If you're gonna
Jesse Ventura, I guess it was it.
Yeah. Both strong men,
muscular men, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, I think. McConaughey. He's really sort of started to cast himself as more of an intellect. I know he turned his movie career around, and he was doing those rom-coms for a long time, and then he totally reframed the conversation around him. So he's got. That shows to me that he's a deliberate, more cerebral person.
Yeah.
I'd be willing to give him the benefit of the doubt and hear him out. But I think the biggest point here is that there's been really he has not discussed anything really substantive, right?
That's right.
On policy. Is he even framing himself as a Democrat or a Republican, or is he independent?
This is the thing. He's described himself as aggressively centrist. That's the term he's used. He has criticized what he calls extremism on both ends of the political spectrum. But it seems to me that he's reserved more criticism for what he calls like illiberal liberals. Like he feels like there are people on the left who are kind of very intolerant of people on the opposite end and sort of, condescending about it. So he's actually said quite a bit about that. The thing that's interesting,
he's anti woke culture.
Yes, that's right.
Cancel culture.
That's right. And the thing is that among Democrats, he was McConaughey versus Abbott, 66% for McConaughey, 8% for Abbott. Among Republicans, 56-30 for Abbott. So all this kind of indicates that if he tried to challenge Abbott in a Republican primary, he probably wouldn't go anywhere. In a general election, he might do a lot better. But then you've got the other challenge of if he runs as a Democrat and he's a centrist, are Democrats going to be, is that going to be pleasing to Democrats? And Greg, the thing for Democrats is that generally speaking, and this looks to be the case this time too, they're kind of scrambling around for anybody. They're kind of scrambling around to find anybody who can run.
Right. What? Yeah, exactly. And what happened to all of the talk about Julian Castro running?
Yeah.
Or was that just me? Did I just make that up? Or is that?
I mean, we've been hearing that for almost a decade.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I mean, it doesn't, if that's going to happen, I mean, geez, you'd think you'd be hearing more about it. But yeah, no. It seems like the Democrats could be in the same position. I mean, the interesting thing will be, does Matthew McConaughey, like if he decides to run, does he do a Kinky Friedman and, run as an independent?
Speaking of Kinky Friedman, his candidacy kind of got derailed by past comments that were considered racist, right?
I think you really have to scrutinize a candidate who, like, if they're a business person and they're telling you that their business acumen is exactly why they should be governor, but they've never actually engaged in public life. Like they've never led any kind of initiative. They've never built a coalition. They've never worked on legislation. I'm always suspicious of that. I just think those are different skill sets. And then it gets even more tenuous when you start talking about celebrities. It's like, okay, we all know Matthew McConaughey, we all know the all right line, but we don't know anything else about him. Like, he's well known. Right? Is that enough? Yeah. Is that really enough? Is that enough to run for governor on? I mean, just because he's well known, we don't know anything about this guy, but we're talking about him seriously, and he's doing well in polling. I mean, to me, it's just
well, Greg, you could go read the memoir he just wrote.
Right, Greenlight. Yeah, I'll be honest with you, I have not read Greenlight, but I guess I'm going to have to at some point. Yeah. Against my will, maybe, but I will. Anyway, so I just don't like the first time he's treated like a candidate, he's going to suffer. It happened with Kinky Friedman.
That's right.
And, he just couldn't withstand, the expectation of debates and, hey, what do you think? Like with Matthew McConaughey, like, what does he think about the power grid? What should happen with that?
That's right.
That kind of mundane thing, like the stuff of governing. Like the moment he has to start seriously talking about that, I think people are just going to lose it.
The poll numbers go down, I mean, because the right now it's the image of Matthew McConaughey, like, the movie star, the guy who's, on the sidelines at the Longhorns games. Yeah, no, but I mean, once the policy details come in, that glow, the luster starts to kind of slip away. I'm sorry, what were you going to say, Brian?
I just say like take your pick. Like, which Matthew McConaughey character do you want to be governor? Like the guy from Dazed and Confused? Are we going to legalize marijuana? The guy from True Detective.
I like the guy from Dallas Buyers Club.
Dallas Buyers Club. I think that could be the McConaughey that Texas needs right now. I don't.
Let's inaugurate him. Yeah.
So anyway, I'm still skeptical he's going to run, and I like you, Greg. I'm really like wary of, celebrities or people from outside of politics. I mean, I think Donald Trump's success was an indication of the fact that people had started to be this sort of sentiment that we need people, the political system is broken. Let's just bring people from the outside who are just going to kind of, who aren't going to care. And they're just going to come in and be, who are going to come in and sort of disrupt everything. And I'm really skeptical about that approach. Yeah, I think it sounds good to people, but
break it more. No, it does. I mean, that's the thing. Like politicians catch hell all the time, justifiably. But like, look, I mean, people who have been in politics for a long time, I mean, they have heft, they have history, they understand constituents, and they understand legislation. An outsider doesn't understand any of that and has a hard time figuring it out on the job.
Well, maybe McConaughey will be attractive to Democrats because it's a sort of a Hail Mary. Because I mean, how long has it been since Democrats held a statewide office? It's been decades,
23 years or something. Yeah. That's right. And the thing I was come to when it comes to people from outside the system who are kind of who run, and you'll hear people saying, well, I can't stand career politicians. We need to get the career politicians out. And I always just think, it seems to be the one sort of profession where expertise is seen as a bad thing. Like you would never say, I'm so tired of those like career doctors practicing medicine. Let's get somebody who has no experience doing it and let's bring them in because they're just going to come in with a fresh perspective. You never hear that in any other line of work, but with politics, it's like, no, if you've actually learned the craft of it, that makes you suspect. So we will see what happens with Matthew McConaughey. The last thing I wanted to talk about before we wrap things up is something that I've noticed over the past few weeks with the throwing around of the term communist and socialist in this election. You have in District 9, which is the most conservative district, the only district in San Antonio that Donald Trump carried in 2020. And you've got John Courage, who's kind of an old school liberal Democrat who was able to sneak in there in 2017 and is running for his third term. And he's getting challenged by Patrick Von Dolen, who's been kind of a perennial in that district. And Von Dolen is a hardcore social conservative, and he has a door hanger, which he's been distributing in the district, referring to John Courage as your socialist neighbor in District 9. And at the same time that he's doing this, you also had Mike Nufke with the San Antonio Family Association, which is the group that Von Dolen has been with for a long time, last week having a press conference at Main Plaza criticizing the fixed SAPD Proposition B, which would take collective bargaining from the police union, and referring to the organizations that support it as communists. And, with Von Dolen and Courage, the things that he cites in Courage that as examples of socialism, and Courage is a liberal Democrat, but he does not accept the socialist tag for himself. But the things that Von Dolen cites are things like the fact that he voted for an equity budget in 2017 when the city decided to start basically trying to look at districts that were sort of shortchanged when it came to street maintenance and that sort of thing, and try to compensate for that in some way. And the entire city council, including Greg Brockhouse, who was on the council at the time, unanimously voted for that equity budget. John Courage was one of them. Von Dolen cites that as proof that John Courage is a socialist. Last year, you had an activist talking about all the African Americans in San Antonio who had been killed at the hands of police, and asked for a moment of silence in which council members would either raise their fist in solidarity or take a knee. And they all did that with the exception of Clayton Perry. But that is being cited as another example of John Courage being a socialist. Greg, I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on the kind of the throwing around of these terms, which I don't know that the people who are throwing them around, I don't know that that they necessarily even know exactly what the terms mean or what they're. Again, if voting for an equity budget makes you a socialist, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, this is all degraded like rhetoric, right? I mean, this is what happens when our politics become as polarized and as tribal as it's become. It really, it just kind of eventually devolves into name calling. And so, two of those names are socialists and communists. And you use it in one of two cases. One where you can't really articulate why you're opposing this politician or this candidate, so you call them a communist. Second is you take things like very marginal things like a budget vote, which almost always passed unanimously. And by the way, which also, did not raise property tax rates,
That's
which,
right.
Like a true socialist would be all for raising the tax rate. I mean, to take marginal issues like that and try to amp them up and make them scary by calling them, socialistic. It's just, it's childish, and it's kind of where we are in our politics, especially the far right at this point.
Yeah. And I think that people in District 9, many of them are probably aware, but, if we're talking about extremism, Patrick Von Dolen and his organization, San Antonio Family Association, they've come out in favor of, gay conversion therapy. They oppose pre-K for SA. They oppose the non-discrimination ordinance. I think that there's I guess the really interesting thing will be to see he's banking on the idea that District 9 is still the ultra conservative district that that it used to be, and Donald Trump did carry it. It was close,
Right, and it's just it's wishful thinking on Von Dolen's part. I mean, he's living in the past. Like he hasn't noticed that. By the way, Courage won election, and to everybody's surprise, by the way, in District 9, nearly 4 years ago, and he pretty handily won re-election.
Yeah.
Calling Councilman Courage a socialist is old hat. Like this has been following him, since his campaign for the office in District 9, and it's still there in some among some voters in the district, and that's who Von Dolen is trying to appeal to. Mm-hmm. But I mean, look, I think Courage generally gets really strong marks for constituent service, and it's hard to underestimate or understate how important constituent service is for council offices. And he's got a first-rate, a first-rate constituent service operation. And you can't, the reason, Von Dolen is pointing to these kind of very marginal things like the budget vote and whether he raised a fist or took a knee is because there are no other votes that you can really point to where, Courage took a really far left position that didn't take, the budget into account. Like he's a very budget-minded council member. He's not. Yeah. He's not, this far left firebrand.
Yeah, I think it's pretty hard to scare people away from somebody who's already been there for 2 terms when they've gotten to know him pretty well. So I don't think that's necessarily going to be all that effective. But it's been an interesting thing to watch during this cycle. We're going to wrap things up there. Hope you all get a chance to vote. Thank you all for listening, and we'll be back next week.